for me, it was like, I was trying to make adjustments without using any kind of water reduction with, any kind of diuretic or what. So, it was kind of like uncharted territory for me. So for me, it was just like I was in shape. I just couldn't lose the water, and I was big as hell, and I was big as anyone. And I remember even guest posing at Weinberger's show, weeks out, or the Pittsburgh. I stepped in for Dorian because remember Dorian retired at Man. He announced his retirement at Manion's show, so they had me come in as like the new guy that's going to kind of be like the up and coming. And I remember everyone's like, "Holy, you have the potential to win this NOC," and that was against like Leveronis and I think Ronnie Coleman and these guys. I mean, it was just like, I mean, for that kind of hype, I mean, I started to believe it a little bit, and I knew I'd be good. And of course, you got Chris Aceto over my shoulder, like, you're gonna be the best, you're gonna blow these guys away, So, he was always my biggest, as much as my coach, he was my biggest fan too,
Yeah, '98 was the year that Ronnie won that Olympia, and I mean that was him and Flex had done, or him and Levroni had done the Night of Champions that year.
He won the United. He won.
Paul had to be tough to you mentally. I think one of the things that a lot of people admire about you, I admire about you, is that you are so mentally tough. You don't care what people think about you. You kind of have a belief about yourself, and you kind of always just keep pushing forward till you achieve what you achieve. How do you stop the self doubt? I mean, because you see guys like Kai Green can never pull the trigger on the Olympia. Obviously not as mentally tough as you. Where did that come from?
You know what? It was my upbringing, my family. I was surrounded by a good quality upbringing. I worked in my brother's concrete business from 11 to 18, and my dad my dad was a pusher, man. I hated my dad a lot of times early in my life because he would just make me work, and he taught me to be a machine, and it really gave me the work ethic to be who I am as a bodybuilder, and to be relentless, and we didn't come from fortunate things. I know there's a lot of media out there that says, oh, Jay Cutler came from a ton of money, but that's not the case. We had 7 kids. My dad raised all of us. He was, a highway, he was a superintendent, so it's not like he had a ton of money, especially supporting 7 kids. And, I had to learn the value of a dollar, and I had to learn the value of working hard to achieve certain things. And I knew, going into bodybuilding, it wasn't going to be easy. But at the same time, I never had a lot of self-doubt. I hate to call it, people look at it as arrogance, and I'm just so confident that maybe sometimes I come off as that. But I've been knocked down enough times and came back from it that, it just, I think it just you just either have or you don't, Dave. I can't really have an explanation because it just would sound silly if I said this. I know what I do, but I just never gave up, and I always believed in myself, and I never seem to question what I do a lot of times.
Now, at the 2000 Night of Champions, that's when you established the Cutler dynasty, so to speak. You won that first pro show in very dominant fashion, beating guys like Paul Dillette, Orville Burke, Lee Priest, Marcus Rule, who was just an absolute freak at the time. Did that validate you? You think that the press and the fans finally said, hey, this guy's for real, he's dangerous?
Yeah, and the funny thing is I had moved to California in '99, and I was living next door to Dillette at the time, and he would drive to Venice every day. And the funny thing is, and you can ask Chris these stories, because I would get up in the morning. I mean, I was so disciplined, man. There was no bodybuilder on this fucking planet that was more disciplined than I was at that time. I would get up every morning at 6 o'clock. I would do an hour of cardio in our little apartment complex. I would go eat breakfast. I would go to the gym and train. By the time I was coming back from the gym at 9 o'clock after I did cardio and did a first weight session, Paul Dillette was just leaving the complex to go do his drive to Venice. When I would go home, I'd eat 2 meals. I'd go back to the gym, and I would train again at 2 o'clock. I would eat, 2 or 3 more meals, and then I would do another hour of cardio in our room at 8 o'clock. And then by 9 o'clock, I'd be in bed, and I'd eat my last meal just after that cardio session, and I'd be in bed, and I'd be ready for the next day. And that was my routine, and that's what it took for me to win the NOC. I came in the best shape I ever came in. I did 50 grams a day, carbohydrates, for the first time in my career. I did, 2 hours of cardio a day. I came in at 260 pounds, and I think I shocked a lot of people by coming in great condition. And I remember Dillette telling me at the Firehouse, we did a photo shoot like weeks up, leading up, 9 weeks out from that show. I remember exactly. And he said, dude, I'm not going to lose this NOC. I'm telling you, I'm going to win it. I'm sorry. I know you want it, but I'm going to win. And I remember when I won the show, I'm thinking in my head, wow, you know, I just beat, you know, some of the greatest guys, and I'm on my way to the top, you know. I remember Ronnie Coleman called me after prejudging. He said, man, congratulations, you won. And at the time, I'm like, how did I win? It's not over yet. And he's like, oh, trust me, you won. So it was pretty cool to have Mr. Olympia telling me, like, wow, you won. And it's kind of like it's kind of the coincidence that, you know, Ronnie called me after prejudging, like, oh, yeah. And then the next year, I'm battling, almost beating him at the Olympia. You know, who would have ever thought? I'm sure he never thought that, because he never would have made the call to tell me how happy he was for me, you know?
Let's talk about that. I mean, that was your day in the sun, so to speak. A lot of people felt that you knocked out the champion on that day, that you beat Ronnie Coleman. It was certainly, possibly your best look ever in your entire career. Lead us up to that show. What was going right in your life? Why was everything, you know, firing on all cylinders for that show?
You know what? I had signed a deal with ISS Research in 2000. After the Olympia in 2000, I got 8th place, and then I signed a deal, and they were like, Jay, listen, we love your reputation. At the time, I was known as the business guy. I was booked up guest posing like crazy, even not being a top guy. I started to gather the Jay Cutler reputation at the time, so everyone knew I was all about business, and I was great with the fans, and I always went my extra step to, you know, make everyone feel comfortable. So they said, we don't care. We just want a spokesperson that's going to represent us the best. We're a new company. We don't care if you compete or not. So at the time, I'm like, you know what, screw it. I'm not even going to compete. And, you know, and then of course, you know, I got with Chris, and I'm like, you know, should I do it? And he's like, yeah, Jay, just come in the way you want to come in. Just come in as big as you want, and just, you know, let's just take the off season, just blow up, and just we'll suck it back down, and you know, just present the Jay Cutler physique that we feel is dominant. Because he's like, I'm telling you, you can beat Ronnie Coleman. And, you know, we had been on tour after the 2000 Olympia, and I mean, he stood there and he's like, Jay, I'm telling you, you're going to beat this guy. Because by the last tour, I mean, it was me and Ronnie were second last 2 shows. And Chris saw it. You know, it's hard for me to see it, but he's like, I'm telling you, Jay, you're going to beat this guy. Like, I remember him saying it over and over and over, and it was just like, it was even getting annoying. And I'm like, shit, Chris, like, come on, man, he's Ronnie Coleman. I mean, he's the greatest ever. And, you know, and then, I mean, all year he kind of just stuck it in my head and just said, you know, I'm telling you, you're going to stand next to this guy, and you're going to dominate this thing. So, you know, leading into the show, I mean, I remember he had me on like 1,000 grams of carbs a day. I did no cardio leading up to the show. I dieted for like 20 weeks. I stayed on a good diet. I would eat, you know, a good, but I was training twice a day. He put me on a twice a day training.
1,000 grams of carbs?
1,000 grams of carbs all the way through. I didn't go. I remember he's like, okay, if we take a low day, it was like 400 or 450 was like, but my body would like disintegrate. So my body was just clicking, man. And you know, we walked into that show. I remember he came out a week before the show, and I was in Aliso Viejo, California, and he showed up and he's like, holy shit, Jay, I was 290, you know, and it was a week out. And he's like, I'm like, what am I going to weigh at the show? He's like, who knows? Who cares? You're just going to like blow everyone away. So he stayed with me, and then of course we started depleting the water. I think I lost like 30 pounds in like 4 or 5 days. By the time we got to Vegas, I was dried out, and just like I still had so much fullness because he had blown me up so much. And you know, I walked on stage at that show at like 260, but inside out, and you know, the rest is history. I mean, I don't know if you were there or you see the pictures. I mean, the fans see the pictures, but what you see in the pictures never displayed what I actually brought to that stage. The people that were there will tell you, I mean, people would just like mind boggle, because how coincidental would it be that I draw the number right next to Ronnie Coleman in the lineup? And that's what won me the show, because, you know, unfortunately for him, that's what happened. We drew the consecutive numbers. So in the lineup, when I was standing next to Ronnie, people are like, holy shit, Jay's beating Ronnie Coleman from the front. And, you know, I had the abs, I had the legs, and I had the crazy shoulders at the time. I mean, of course, Ronnie still had the back double and, the crazy glutes, but it was like, who cares? I mean, I won a lot of other poses against him. So that's where the controversy came in, and the result. I finished second, but I was ecstatic to be second, man. It was like, I knew I made it. And that's when the first time in my career that I actually knew, shit, I'm going to win the Mr. Olympia contest. I knew myself I would win it.
Well, I mean, you beat Kevin Maroney, Sean Ray, Cormier. I mean, you beat a really good lineup, too. It wasn't like a bunch of slackers.
No.
So that had to make you feel good about yourself. But, that was a controversial year because I believe they were still diuretic testing that show, weren't they?
Yeah, they diuretic tested. Wayne D'Amelia was then, I think, the president of IFBB, and they had this bullshit diuretic test in there, and it was like IOC rules or whatever, where they were supposed to do stuff with the samples and whatever else, do it the right way. Of course, they didn't. But they claimed I failed on 5 diuretics, which was absolutely impossible. That was the whole thing. And so I remember I got the call like 2 weeks after, and Wayne's like, "Hey, I got some bad news." And I'm like, "All right, what's the bad news?" He's like, "Well, you failed the diuretic test." I said, "Okay, what does that mean?" He goes, "Well, you're gonna have to forfeit your $60,000." And I said, "Okay, that's not going to happen. What's my option?" And he said, "Well, you can either take it and lose your money, or you can fight it." I said, "Okay, I'm going to fight it." He's like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah." So I said, "Okay, what do I do?" I hired an attorney out of Orange County. I laid out, what I did, and I had them retest the samples. Of course, it came back that I failed. I think it was even not even 5. It went to 4. So I'm like, this is bullshit. So, my attorney went in, he looked at the rules and regulations in the IFBB handbook, and next thing you know, they were supposed to have the samples handled properly. It was a disaster. They had the samples sitting backstage, and things could have been switched. It was just so off that, I remember, finally my attorney's like, we're not gonna. You guys really want to fight this? You have no ground. And they're like, okay, forget it. And they waved their hands and said no more. But it was Wayne. Wayne was, I don't know. Wayne just had some sort of ego about him, and he was just trying to do. And Joe Weider was like, he didn't give a shit about diuretic testing. I remember talking to Joe about it, and I'm like, Joe, this is bullshit. He's like, I know it's bullshit. I don't know why Wayne is doing this. So no one was even. I remember Jim Manning at the time. He was running the NPC or whatever, and he's like, so what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to sue him. I'm just going to. I'm going to fight it. I'm not going to give up. That was the first big paycheck I ever got, $60K. I was second at the Olympia at the time. And, I wanted to start buying property, man. I was in California. I was itching to start buying stuff. I mean, once I started, I remember I got the money, I bought, started buying property in Vegas. I had 7 homes by the next year, so I needed the money at the time.
It's funny because you were one of the few, maybe the only person who's ever fought the NPC, the IFBB, excuse me, and won. I don't think anyone has even tried. I mean, you had such confidence in yourself to do that. I think a lot of people would have been afraid. I mean, Sean Ray lost his prize money at that Arnold Classic in 19.
Yeah, Nasser El Somebody, but it's bullshit, Dave.
I'm sure they handled samples properly back then either. That was very ballsy of you to do that. I mean, because no bodybuilder had ever done that.
No, but you know what? I'll be honest with you. At the time, I honestly didn't give a shit what happened. If they banned me or whatever, I really, I had such a chip on my shoulder. That's how I always was. If I believed in something, and I knew I didn't do anything wrong, that was the main thing. And I know people question that or whatever, but, listen, everyone was taking diuretics. They had these certain ones that were passing or what wasn't. It was just such bullshit that, someone had to call them out on it, and I was the one that did it. And the thing is like Jim Mannion, that's why I have so much respect for Jim, because he was so supportive. And I'm great friends with Steve Weinberger. I mean, we promote shows together, and we've been friends a long time. But these guys, knew what right from wrong. And I mean, it just went to show. I mean, that was the demise. That was the beginning of the demise of Wayne D'Amelia in the position he was. As sooner or later, Jim Mannion took over, and Wayne was out. I mean, there's just a lot of behind the scenes bullshit that was going on, and Joe was always true, and he always backed me up. And I think at the end, Joe's like, listen, Wayne, enough of this shit. My name's on the show. We don't need this publicity. Just let the guy deal with this. Don't bother wasting your time. And he had no ground. So, I mean, it is what it is. And then, yeah, I know they tested, like, the next year, Chris is like, screw it, you're going to go to the Arnold and you're going to blow everyone away at the Arnold. So we went to the Arnold in 2002. They tested again. And I remember Wayne came up to me backstage. He's like, did you take your test? I said, yeah, Wayne, I took my test. And of course I passed that. And, then they're like, okay, screw this testing. It's pointless. And they never tested again after that.
You basically got rid of the testing, which is pretty funny.
Yeah.
You placed 4 times consecutively second at the Olympia behind Ronnie Coleman. I always felt that, you had some set of cojones on yourself to believe in yourself so much you were going to be Ronnie Coleman at some point because, quite frankly, people thought Ronnie was never going to lose. I was one of those people that I thought Ronnie would never lose. How did you have such belief in yourself that you knew you'd eventually catch him, pass him, and beat him? Because it took a long time before that happened.
Because I saw the look in Ronnie's eye every time he won the Olympia. And then every year in that announcement, I don't care what, I stood next to Ronnie Coleman inches from him. And he was scared every time. And that's the difference between me and everybody else. And I want you to look back, and you can go back, and the fans can go back and watch any video of whether I won or lost. My reaction is always the same. Because mentally I prepared for both victory and loss. And I always had the confidence, no matter what, it was always going to be a positive. It wasn't a life-altering situation. Chris Aceto was a huge backbone to my success of being confident. Because he knew every year, Dave, I'm not going to bullshit you guys. I went into the Mr. Olympia thinking I was going to win. No matter how crazy it sounds, after 2003 when Ronnie came back as a freak, I said in 2004, Chris is like, screw it, you're just going to come in huge. I came in massive in 2004. 2005, I decided to tone down a little bit. Shit, I had him on the ropes that year. And I knew in 2006, I knew 100% I was going to win the Mr. Olympia in 2006. I had no doubt in my mind. But every year I watched Ronnie stand next to me, and before he fell on the ground and he cried, he was scared. He was scared.
Well, you proved that persistence pays off for certain. You won that Olympia. You skipped the Arnold Classic that year after winning 3 consecutive times. That had to be tough because I know that you gave up a lot of money on that show. Was that a calculated decision to skip the Arnold, put everything into the Olympia?